So with our presentations, of course, it's really important that we plan. There's nothing worse than listening to a presentation by somebody who's obviously only thought about it 5 minutes before they've stood on stage. They haven't got a cohesive set of content. They're not quite sure what they're saying about what, where. They're not sure whether their facts are correct. All of those sort of things. So how do we bring together a plan for the presentation? We've already talked about the structure of our presentation, how we can structure a presentation. This is more focused on how we bring together the resources and the thoughts within that structure to give us a good set of content to work with. So a basic tip of mine is don't leave it to the last minute. Yes, the final details, get to pulling the perfect PowerPoint deck and all the rest of it together might be something that you do in the last couple of days beforehand. But especially if you're presenting on a topic you're less familiar or comfortable with, then it's really worthwhile making sure you allow yourself some space to prepare and think about it. So the way I work is I make sure if I've got a presentation in a couple of weeks' time, that at least a couple of weeks beforehand, I've sketched out the bare bones of what I'm going to say, what points I'm going to cover, what I want to think about, what it is I know about the subject matter and the facts I've already got at my fingertips, and what I don't know. The reason for that is I often find that I can then use time which is otherwise dead time, i.e. time when I'm driving, travelling somewhere, sitting, relaxing in an evening, going for a run, of course. All of those times in my day when my mind just sort of free thinks. And I can reflect then on what I'm going to be presenting about and sort of shuffle ideas round in my head and see, well, does that work? Does that help what I'm saying? And all of that's able to do without necessarily taking up time in my day for specific planning. So allowing myself a couple of weeks before I'm going to really start putting the detail down into my script, putting together my PowerPoint, allows me time to just free flow and all of that. It also allows me time to areas that I need a bit more research to make sure I can go out and do that research, pull that together. So the more time you can allow between when you know you've got a presentation due to start putting some basic structure together before you're going to be actually doing your presentation, the better. Perhaps not too much time, because otherwise you just sort of lose the motivation and the sort of momentum on that. But 2 to 4 weeks is a good time guide for me to sort of start pulling that together. You're going to need to do some research. Unless it's a subject you're 100% familiar with, you need to make sure you're up to date, perhaps on some statistics. You haven't got data from 3 or 4 years ago. You've got perhaps some new images about it, all of those sort of bits and pieces. So make sure that you've got some up-to-date information. You've done your bit of research. We've all got Google to our fingertips, so there's no excuses these days for not doing our research well and making sure that we've got good, credible data sources for that. Do some brainstorming. Have a think about how you can bring all of that together. One of the ways that you can do that, well, a couple of different ways. One is just to sketch down a bullet pointed list of headings that you want to cover content under, and then you can sort of move those around and see which fit together and which are key headings, which perhaps are just filler and don't really add to your presentation, so you can work through that. Other people really get on with mind mapping, and this is certainly a method I've used for planning a presentation, thinking about your core points and then seeing how they filter off onto either side. So various tools you can use for starting to bring together your information, pull together a plan, and make sure you've got a good body of content there as part of your presentation. As part of that, you're going to start thinking about your slide deck and making sure that you've got a good set of visual aids that are going to be an assist, not a hindrance to your presentation. So again, the reason for making sure you allow plenty of time is that perhaps if you've got particular data sets you want to present, you've got particular stats or quotes you need to get, and make sure you've got the right person saying the quote, not just what Google says on the first one on the list, because sometimes the wrong people can be attributed. Data, you want to make sure that data is clear and presented in a way that assists your point, and not in a confusing diagram that your audience can't really see properly. The ledgers are too small, all of that sort of thing. So you need time to prepare those type of resources. So make sure you allow that time. Make sure that you really thought through your planning so you've got a good body of content ready to bring together in that structure. The final step, of course, is to make sure you pull that structure together. So we've talked about the rule of 3, good guidance in terms of the number of points we're going to cover. We've talked about making sure you've got a good closure with a clear call to action, with a clear outcome, with a clear way for the audience to take that call to action. And we thought about our introduction, laying out our store. What are we going to be covering? So your audience has confidence that they're not going to be sitting around for hours with a fluffy presentation that doesn't seem to quite know where it's going, that they know the structure, they know where you're going to be going, they know what you're going to be covering, and they're ready and prepared for that, and are willing to follow you on the journey of your presentation. So there's a few tips about planning your presentation, about making sure you've got the right content together, the way to do that. Do allow yourself enough time to plan your presentations. Don't leave it to the last minute. It really is obvious when somebody has done so. I can really tell the difference between somebody who's taken the time to prepare and given themselves some time to prepare, and those who've left it to the last minute, when often the content doesn't quite hang together. There's stuff in there which doesn't really need to be there. There's some stuff which isn't really answered in what they have put in there. So all of that is left out. A final thing you can do in terms of planning, run it past somebody else. So you've brought together all your content, you've put it together in a rough script, you've created a rough perhaps slide deck. Have a chat through it with a peer, perhaps a housemate or whatever else it might be, so that you can just sort of see, does this sound right? Am I in the right lines? Does it make sense? Is there any obvious gaps that person can spot for you? It's always good to have another pair of eyes giving you that feedback. Hope that helps. Happy planning.